Hi there, my name's Vince, I'm a composer, and in this video I'd like to talk about some fundamental aspects of music theory that have enabled me to get more comfortable writing music in a wide variety of styles, and also enabling me to improvise in ways that wouldn't have been possible before this kind of knowledge. It's very much aimed at people who are already starting their musical journey, maybe just picking up an instrument, playing some songs. Maybe you're already composing and improvising, but you're not really thinking about it in terms of music theory. So the broad term for the system, the music theories of system that I'll be working in today would be diatonic harmony, or major scale based harmony. But there are lots of other kinds of systems that are around that I definitely pull on. This is just one that I think is very fundamental to so many different styles of music. And the way that I'd like to do this is by bringing up some visual aids and doing it through improvising at the piano, so that I can show you how these music theory concepts can immediately be applied to just creating and expressing yourself on your instrument. The term that I really like is, that I came across recently, there's a YouTuber called Phil Best, go check him out, but he has this concept of musical fluency, that fun experience, that kind of quite therapeutic process sometimes, or that just joyful experience of creating music that comes from being able to say different things on your instrument, be fluent in music so that you can express different emotional shades and say things maybe that you wouldn't even be able to say through verbal language. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So this is the major scale. We're going to mostly focus on the C major scale for now, but everything that I do in this video can be applied to any other major scale. But I'm going to start with the C major scale because that's very clear on the piano. That's a major scale. It's a kind of pattern of notes, or a pattern of, I guess you'd say that the key thing is that this collection of notes has a certain characteristic sound as a whole kind of family of notes. And it's not really about the notes themselves, it's actually more about the spacing of the notes. So what I mean by the spacing is that in the C major scale, we have this starting note, a C, and then we have a move that goes 2 half steps or a whole step up to the next note. So a half step would be like this, a whole step goes like this. So a whole step is twice as long as a half step, as you might expect. So we go whole step up, then another whole step up, then a half step, then a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and then a half step. And so those kind of note spacings are what gives the C major scale its characteristic sound. So if I do the same set of whole steps and half steps in the same order but starting on a different note, we get another major scale. So this one starts on an A flat, so it's an A flat major scale. The one that we did before is a C, starts on a C, and so it's a C major scale. If we do one on E, we have an E major scale, and that's got a certain sound to it. If we contrast the C major scale with the sound of a C minor scale, that's the C natural minor scale, it has a different sort of flavour to it. Compared to major. So the major and the minor are kind of referring to these different emotional shades. Sometimes they're described as happy and sad. I think it's a bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. I'm going to improvise using the C major scale, and I'm going to only use notes within the C major scale to build up both chords and melodies, and have a listen to some different styles that are possible just using notes from the scale. So that's kind of a fairly lyrical, romantic style. Let's try something in a different style completely. Now let's do a couple of improvisations in a minor scale, and the minor scale I'm going to choose is A natural minor, which contains the same note names as C major. If you look again, you can just see it's using only the white notes on the piano. That's the kind of pool of notes that I've decided to use, both for my chords and my melodies. But by kind of having A as the root rather than C as the root, the home, it gives a different inflection, and that's because the combination of whole steps and half steps occurs in a different order, a different pattern. Okay, so that was a sort of plaintive but lyrical, romantic kind of thing again, but with a minor scale. So it has that minor scale feel to it, or I should say a minor key feel to it. Let's try again a different mood, just to show you that these things aren't tied to specific moods. So what was going on there from a music theory perspective? Well, I've already touched on the fact that the notes that I was choosing all derived from one scale per improvisation. Similarly, I was only choosing chords that used notes that also existed within that C major scale, the same scale. Then, in addition to that, I had a certain way of prioritizing some notes over other notes. I was able to choose notes because I had a sense of what those notes would mean in the musical context that I was in. And similarly with chords, I have a sense of, which chords first of all exist within the scale, but also how to organize that information. In some sense, the order of importance of certain chords, although I use the word importance with caution, it's not so much that some notes are more important than others, but it's more that some notes feel more stable than others, and others feel more suited to being like decorative, or, you know, they might feel more surprising. And so how to organize the notes and how to organize the chords kind of in your mind is a key part of musical storytelling as well. So I'm going to talk about each of those points in turn and just continue to improvise a bit to illustrate my points. Okay, so the first point is just staying within a scale to create melody. Now, obviously with a scale, such as C major, you can play it starting on a C, going up and going down like that, and that's how we're traditionally taught to play scales. But once you start to think of scales as a pool of available notes that you can use, you know, obviously the order then becomes a matter of preference. For example, you could play a C major scale like this. So I repeated some of the notes, I played notes at different points on the keyboard, but the thing that was guiding me was, you know, in this case, only playing the white notes. I've spent quite a lot of time playing scales as patterns, for example. You know, playing it like that is a little bit boring, so I usually like to sort of try and make it as musical as I can, turn them into little mini improvisations, even if it's something like that, you know, add some rhythm, add some character. You can do patterns like this as well, where you start on the first note and maybe start on the fifth note, and you move up the scale like that. You keep the interval or the space between the notes the same, and you travel in a particular direction. Or you could switch up the direction. And again, these feel like, you know, very close to real music, these kinds of patterns. It doesn't take much to turn something like that into something that feels more like a piece of music. So patterns like that can be really good for just jumping off points for improvisation. But here, I'm not really thinking too much about the notes. I'm mainly using my ears. I'm mainly just exploring the scale in different ways and, yeah, using my ears and my intuition about where a particular melody should go. So what happens when you start to improvise sticking to a scale is that the sound of the scale, like the sound of that pattern of majorness, starts to come through, starts to emerge. The more notes you hear, you kind of, in the listener's mind, it kind of starts to develop a character that is associated with majorness, especially when you're grounding the piece of music with the root note of the chord. That has a certain character compared with a minor scale that might start on the same note. This is the minor scale, the C minor, natural minor scale. If I do something similar, what we're getting there is we're getting melodic shapes and little kind of backwards and forwards and a leap and a step, but we're also getting the sort of sound of the harmony that exists within the scale. So by limiting yourself to a particular set of notes, the sound of that set of notes will come across. So now going back to the C major scale, let's talk about chords. So here's the notes of the C major scale again. And what I'm going to do is take the first, the third, and the fifth notes of the scale, and that gives us our C major chord, which is considered the root chord of the C major key center, the tonal center of C. C majorness is kind of rooted here. This is our home chord. when we're talking about C major. And we can take this shape, this kind of spacing of notes, and we can move it through the scale. And so here we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possible chords, or triads, triad meaning just 3-note chords, before it goes back to the same chord that we had at the beginning, but up an octave. These are often notated using Roman numerals, so rather than having number 1, number 3, number 4, you have them written as Roman numerals. And we obviously, again, just like with scale notes, we don't have to play them going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We can find ways of playing them that sound interesting. For example, if we were writing a piece, we might like the movement between chord 1 and then chord 3. And that might form the structure of a piece. So this is one way that we can start to explore the harmony within the C major key area, is just by, moving chords around. If you're comfortable with trying different inversions on your instrument, which just means taking your basic C major chord and 1, 3, 5, respelling that so it goes 3, 5, 1 instead, or 5, 1, 3. And you can very quickly start to explore chord relationships within the C major scale. And again, right now, we're talking about doing this in a process that's largely just guided by your ears and your attention, trying to conjure up a bit of a mood. Maybe the mood is a bit more upbeat. When you're exploring all of these chords that exist within a scale, one thing you could do is find a pattern. Just like playing them up, that's a pattern, but you could choose a slightly different pattern, like 1, 3, 2, 4, and play it like that. That can be an interesting jumping off point for ideas. Another great place to start, to just kind of start getting a feel for the C major chords, is to start on a C major and then pick 2 or 3 other chords from the set, but then go back to C major as your home and really feel that C major is your landing place as well as the place that you start. So for example, I could pick that was using 1, 3, 4, 1, and the minute I start to do that, again, it sounds like a piece of music. You can play it in different styles. Or let's just quickly do the same thing for A minor, A natural minor, which is this scale. Again, we're going to take 1, 3, 5 as our starting point. That's the A minor, and then we're going to move that shape through. And just as with the major scale, we have a bunch of chords here. And so these are our options. And just like with a scale, we could even practice it in a kind of pattern. I actually really like the kind of messy sound that you get when you hold the pedal down. You can make it sound like bells. So again, it's really useful to remember that you're trying to ground, in this case, everything in A minor. And so when you're improvising, trying to think of A minor as your landing place or your home, and then thinking of ways of going away from home and coming back to home. Back to home, you know. That kind of thing. So those are some ideas to just get you playing around with the chords in the particular scale. One of the things that you might notice is, especially in that last example, things can start to get a little bit splashy or a little bit unfocused sounding. Sometimes it can feel like it lacks a bit of clarity. And so in practice, what I tend to do when I'm creating musical material and stories and journeys using these kinds of concepts is that I prioritize certain notes and certain chords. And so let's talk about prioritizing notes first of all. The first key idea is that I'm going to prioritize the chord tones. If I have a little progression going, say I'm going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord and back again, and I'm building a musical story around this kind of journey from 1 to 4 and back again. If I play a melody that contains the chord tones, then that means I'm going to pick notes in my right hand, in this case, and I'm going to anchor the melody around the notes of the first chord, the C major, and then when I move to the F major, I'm going to anchor my melody around notes that exist in this F major chord. And then when I change, I'm going to go back to thinking mainly about the notes that exist in this chord. And I'm using other notes as well to kind of connect the dots, but the places where I'm kind of resting, or the places that occur on the sort of the strong points in the music, the stronger beats of the bar, if that means anything to you, the places where it feels like there's an emphasis. Like if I'm playing in 3, for example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It feels like that 1 is very important to the groove. And so it's really important what notes I choose in my melody on those important 1 moments. And so if I go, and I anchor my melody around the chord tones, it sounds a lot clearer because my melody is helping to communicate the underlying harmony. So that's kind of stage 1. You can really do a huge amount by building melodies that intentionally land and target the chord tones. Of course, this can end up sounding a little bit simplistic or a little bit bland if that's all you're doing. So then level 2 of complexity would be starting to introduce non-chord tones in a way that feels complementary or decorative or is creating something, a special moment. So we're kind of using the chord tones as like our bread and butter, and then we're sort of just seasoning it a little bit with some other notes as well. So an example of that might be using chord tones to begin with. Okay, that's all mainly chord tones. So there, I wanted to create a little moment of tension and release, so I used a non-chord tone, but still within the scale, and then I kind of released the tension by bringing it back to a chord tone. All chord tones. all chord tones, but then did you notice how this note, it has something else that it's bringing in? It feels a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more complex. And that's because this is a non-chord tone note in the context of this chord, which is an F major. It still feels unified because we're just using notes within the scale. If you wanted to kind of go one step deeper, and this is kind of slightly optional at this stage, but you might analyze the relationship between this note and this chord. And in order to do that, we need to think, well, this is an F major scale, so we're going to talk about the meaning of this note in relation to F major at this particular slice in time. And an F major scale is this. And in that scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that E is a 7 against the F, so it's hitting the major 7. And that has a particular sound. And I happen to know that major sevenths in melodies have a certain sort of slightly yearning, slightly innocent quality, and so that's kind of become part of my vocabulary. I know that I can reach for that sound. It's going to have a certain emotional impact if we hit this kind of non-chord tone moment. But the main thing that I want to get across is we're just staying within this one C major scale for everything, and certain melody notes are going to feel more stable or more comfortable than others, and those are the melody notes that hit the chord tones of whatever chord you're on at a given time. And so it's about using non-chord tones with intention and building melodies that have this mixture of stability and instability, tension and release. So that's thinking very much from chord to chord as you play. But there's another way that I like to think, which I'll just gloss over quickly, and that is to think mainly in terms of my root chord. So for example, in C major, I might construct a little riff that is based around that C major sound, the C major chord sound, so it's going to use some chord tones within C major. Something like that. One way that I can, create a different kind of journey or feeling is by continuing this C major-y type of melody. And I say C major-y because it contains those chord tones. It's telegraphing or communicating C major. But then I could change the chord underneath but keep the notes the same. So here I've gone to the 4 chord, and it's kind of recontextualized that riff. So I'm kind of almost just playing C major across both chords, and it's creating some interesting clashes between the chord and the notes that are being played. But the ear kind of makes sense of it because C major is our root key, our root chord. And also we've kind of prepared the ear by establishing it in a normal way, and then we've shifted the harmony underneath it. So that's another way you can be thinking, is thinking mostly in terms of your home chord, your root chord, and seeing how that fits with other chords that you might play underneath, and just be aware that you're going to end up with some clashes, and so it's up to your ears to decide whether you like the effect and the sound that that's creating. But those are sort of two contrasting approaches. I would say the kind of core approach is just being very aware and conscious of the chord tones for each chord that's going by, and attempting to craft melodies that anchor around those chord tones. Now, just as we decided to prioritize certain notes when it comes to playing melodies, we can also prioritize certain chord choices as being a little more foundational and kind of like your bread and butter when it comes to the chords that exist within a major scale. The first two chords that I want to talk about are the 1 chord and the 5 chord. The 1 chord, as we've already discussed, is like our rooting, our home. And so a lot of the music that we create is going to be based around this idea of you're establishing home and then you're going away and then you're coming back again. And one of the classic ways to do that is to go from 1 to 5 and then back to 1. And that's just a very common pattern in music, in all styles of music, to go 1, 5, 1. It creates this kind of question answer, this 1, 5, 1, home, away, home. Let's find our 1 and 5 chord in a minor key. So going back to A minor, 1 is 1, 3, 5, as we've mentioned, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now with minor, there's a slight wrinkle or exception, and that is that very commonly, instead of the 5th chord being played as minor, it's often also played as major. That just means to raise the middle note by a half step, and we end up with a pair of chords that sounds like this. Let's improvise a bit just using that 1 to 5 motion. Again, trying to pay attention to chord tones. And I'll be using inversions to kind of make the music feel a bit smoother, but I'm still just going 1 to 5. So again, every time we play with these kinds of harmonic concepts, we want to try and make it into music as much as possible. Another very common chord, again a very sort of foundational building block chord in musical grammar, if you like, is the 4 chord. So this combination of 1, 4 and 5 gives us a huge amount of possibilities, especially when we start to use inversions. So let's do C major. So our 1 chord, our 4 chord and our 5 chord in C major are 1, C major, 4, F major and 5, G major. And we're going to use these as our fundamental building blocks for creating some musical journeys. Let's just see where this one takes us. So just using chords 1, 4 and 5 there, I wasn't always playing the whole chord, but I was always playing the bass notes, and I was kind of, if you like, imagining that there was a full chord there and making sure that my melody generally communicated the chord or deliberately didn't communicate what the chord was, didn't use a chord tone, but for a dramatic effect. Let's do another one in a minor key, just using 1, 4 and 5. So we're thinking of 1, 4, 5 as our kind of primary colours, and then we might start to introduce other chords like 6 and 3, and less frequently 7, to be honest. Let's do one more using a 6 chord as well as our 1-4-5, and then I'll leave you to explore other combinations. So let's go back to C major. So the 6th chord in C major is A minor, and I'll just do a quick one, improvising just using 1, 6, 4 and 5. So the other thing to mention is that I've obviously played a lot of songs, and I hope you will too, because it's a great way to learn musical fluency. What happens is that over time you start to recognize patterns, especially if you're able to analyze a little bit the music that you're engaging with, perhaps with the help of a teacher, analyzing chord patterns in terms of these numbers that we've been talking about in particular. Can really help you to build awareness of these different motions and patterns that come up. And, it can help you to put a label on things when you come across something in a piece of music that you really like, that you're really drawn to. Getting it under your fingers on your instrument is a great place to start, but then also having a little bit of an insight into what's going on there in terms of the numbers and the relationship to the underlying key, what's going on in the melody in terms of how that's fitting with the underlying chord. These kinds of music theory analysis things are great for getting closer to anything that you come across that sparkles at you and you're like, I really love that sound. I want that sound to become part of me and part of the music that I create. And that's really what this is all about. You're not trying to create your own musical language from scratch, but you're just observing what moves you and then using these kinds of concepts that we've been talking about in this video to help put a label on things so that it's easier to memorize and recall certain patterns and progressions at your instrument when you're playing, when you're speaking on your instrument. So that's all I want to say about diatonic harmony in this lesson. As a footnote, I just want to quickly hint at some other possibilities that exist where you take this system as your starting point, but then you use things kind of from the outside to spice it up a little bit. One simple way to sort of decorate or enrich a chord progression that you might have going on that perhaps is a diatonic chord progression is to play around and flip the type of chord that you're working with. For example, if I have a little pattern like this, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. This is a very common pattern in music. One thing we can do to spice it up and start to bring in notes from outside of the major scale that we built that from is to change some of the minor chords into major and maybe change some of the major chords into minor. So let me take that 2 chord, for example, and turn it into a major chord instead and hear what the progression sounds like. I'll play it one more time. I don't know about you, but for me, when you add that major chord, it kind of gives it a little bit of an emotional lift, and that might be something that is relevant to the song that you're working on. So that's quite a mild way of spicing it up. It still feels very grounded. It's just we have that slightly different flavour in there mixed in because of that note that exists outside of the C major scale. Sticking with chords, we could be a bit more aggressive or a bit more adventurous and take a chord that just doesn't exist within the scale normally. For example, in C major, the E flat chord doesn't really exist. You know, these are our C major chords. E flat major doesn't exist within that set, although it does share, there is a C major scale note in there. So that might give us a clue as to how we want to use it. But fundamentally, this sounds quite outside from our C major world that we've created. This is all C major-y stuff. If we flip to that E flat chord, you know, it has an interesting and slightly colourful sort of thing that gives us. And every one of these outside chords that you bring in will have a slightly different flavour to it. So it's all about using your ears and using your heart and soul to, you know, come to some kind of decision about whether that chord fits the vibe that you're trying to create. Similarly, in melodies, we can just bring out the odd note that doesn't exist within the C major scale as a sort of melodic flourish. For example, if we take our C major scale, if we start to just play around with using an F sharp in there, maybe in the context of a C major chord, so we start with a chord tone, nice and stable. You know, that has a very particular sound to it, especially in this tempo and in this register. It means something. At least it means something to me. And that might be what you want. It also is like a statement, isn't it? I mean, it feels like we're now talking about something a little bit more specific. I can't put into words what we're talking about, but that's why we have music. So I hope that was interesting, or at least entertaining, and let me know any questions that you have. Feel free to shoot me questions in the comments section or shoot me an email. And in the meantime, have fun, happy composing, happy improvising, and I'll see you on the next video.